Opening slide graphic text, enhancing learning and skill development. Title, Session 6, When to Teach and When to Step Away, with Milton Tyree. Logos, Belonging Matters, talksthatmatter.net.
So there are a lot of different avenues. I'm really focusing mostly here on non-work kinds of scenarios, determining how and when to get involved with instruction and how and when to step aside. So like planning instruction for roles outside of home, like the employee role or a shopper role or a gym member role, and then planning instruction for tasks within a home, like making tea or cutting the grass or preparing meals or washing clothes. And what I'm going to rely on here is this principle of social role valorization theory that goes throughout the whole theory. And it's the culturally valued analog. And this is so helpful because, you know, and just around people with intellectual disabilities, so often the knee-jerk reaction to everything is, let's create a special program for them, you know, to learn. And so what the culturally valued analog tells us is, let's not do anything special until we've explored what is typical and valued. What happens for those of us with a socially valued status, with socially valued roles. So the culturally valued analog is just a societal practice that can be encountered with reasonable frequency in the valued sector of society. That's what people are used to seeing. It's things that most members of society would hold positive expectations of images of. In other words, what happens for people in the same culture of the same age and gender doing the same thing. So I'm going to start by showing an example of the culturally valued analog at my church. And so Connor was a 4-year-old when he and his parents started coming to our church. And he was somebody who needed a lot of consideration around routine and structure and familiarity. And so the culturally valued analog helped those of us at our church who wanted to support Connor and his family for successful involvement in the church. And if Connor was successfully involved in the church, that would really help the rest of his family, his brother and his mom and dad be involved. What is it that happens with other 4-year-olds? And we didn't want to tell the Bradleys, oh, we have a special class for your son because he's autistic and he needs a lot of routine and structure and familiarity. Instead, it helped us think about, what does a 4-year-old class look like that has structure, familiarity, you know, and routines? And one of the things we realized is that our 4-year-old class did not have that because we had teachers who changed all the time. And the other, you know, it was like it was hard to get a teacher to commit to do it the whole year or whatever. And so we got to thinking about that. I thought, well, you know, honestly, having the same teacher is going to be important for Connor. It just is. It's a condition that's going to be really important for it to go well for him. And wouldn't that be good for all of the 4-year-olds? So we just really paid a lot of attention to who the teacher in the 4-year-old class would be. And Carla was a teacher whom we invited to teach the 4-year-old class because she was an expert elementary teacher. My wife is one of these. She's retired now, as Carla was when she taught this class. But it's like elementary teachers know how to structure the day so that it goes well for students. And so we said, you know, we have a student who's especially needing structure, routine, and familiarity. And so we're wanting a teacher who's going to be there every week. And so we spent time, you know, getting to know Connor a bit and talking to his folks about when things worked well for him and when they didn't. And they said, well, you know, if there would be like an assistant in the class, and so that if Connor needed some assistance, that would be really helpful. And so we recruited Thomas, whom you see sitting at the end of the table, who was a high school sophomore at the time, I think, and recruited Thomas to be a classroom assistant. And we said, so we got a bunch of 4-year-olds. There is one 4-year-old in particular who from time to time may need some assistance, but we don't want you to call attention to Connor or what it is that he needs, because we want you to be there to assist all of the students. So Thomas and Carla were ingredients that were added to the 4-year-old class that helped it work well for Connor. And one of the things that happened was not only did it work well for Connor, but it worked well for all the students. And Connor did get familiar enough with the other students that when there was an Easter egg hunt or something like that, like a one-off event, he participated in that. And, it's like he had, I guess, kind of this reservoir of success, at least with this grouping and with this people, that it seemed to work pretty nicely. I saw Connor's mom at church earlier this week, actually just on Tuesday. I was out there meeting with a group, and Connor's mom stuck his head in the door, and Connor is a freshman at Bellarmine University, a Catholic university here in town. And she said, I just wanted you to know that Connor is a straight A student, and he's doing especially well in environmental science, which is what he wants to major in. Isn't that cool? Oh, and the other thing that we told Carla about Connor was that he's a really good reader. He's 4 years old and he knocks it out of the ballpark. So, this would be something that Connor would really excel at whenever y'all are doing reading in class or whatever. Thomas Martini is long out of college and out in a successful adult. And I don't know what all the other kids are doing, but hopefully as well as Connor and Thomas are. So that's an example of honoring typical ways instead of having a special class. I've already talked about Sam. Mike was the person who provided instruction for him, but I studied the instruction plenty. Let's look at CVA and joining a gym. There'd be lots of different angles here to think about. So, one of the questions would be, following the CVA, what's the culture of the gym? So somebody, you're supporting somebody and they want to get more involved in their community and want to join a gym. So you'd want to think about, what is the culture of the gym? Would he be interested, he or she, would they want to go to a gym that's for bodybuilders? Maybe, maybe that would be the culture where everybody goes there and you hear a lot of hollering and grunting and groaning and lifting really heavy weights and stuff like that. Would it be that, or would it be a place just for everyday people to go stay fit because they have a very different culture? Would it be classes or mostly individual kinds of stuff? Would it be someplace where they would have exercise classes or walking groups or things like that? Or people just go work out on their own? Or would it be some of both? What are the ages of the other members? Because this gym I used to go to, a lot of people look more like me than like Robin, the man in the orange and blue workout shirt here. What would the attire be? What would you look like when you showed up? What's the cost? Is there a contract? Just all of that stuff you would want to decide, right? How do you learn? So who are the people who help you learn about that? So if you want to learn about the gym, who takes you through and shows you how to use stuff, who teaches you how to use the equipment? Is that going to be sufficient? Or, what does it look like to join a class? Who are the people who typically assist new members to become established and involved? And you just want to honor what's typical and valued as much as possible. So let me just stop here on this example, this joining a gym. Does anybody have experience doing something like that before? And were these the kinds of questions you were thinking about, or things in addition to this? Or that's an example of just a slice of everyday life that might be interesting to some people. Like, what's the culture of the faith community? Boy, that's going to be all over the place. Let me tell you a story. So a couple of years ago, I was working on an initiative through the university called Putting Faith to Work. And it was a really interesting idea. And the idea was that faith communities are so rich, not only in their faith tradition and fellowship and spiritual nurture, but they're really rich with employment networks. Because within a faith community, you're going to have all kinds of people and all kinds of occupations. And just think, so the idea was this: is there a member of your faith community who has a disability who wants to work? And if so, how could you network to help this person? It was all, rooted around discovery and conditions, interest, and contributions. Who in your faith community would know somebody where you could, get a good job? That's a shortcutted kind of answer. Well, I was interviewing people in different faith communities around this idea. And I was talking to a rabbi in Lexington, Kentucky, where the university was. And so one of my first questions is, well, we're just kind of testing this idea, what you would think about it. Do you have any people with disabilities who come to the synagogue? And he said, no, I can't. He said he named some children. And I said, okay, well, that's terrific. And I said, what about adults, like working age adults? And he said, no, I can't think of anybody. And he said, wait, there is a group of people, and they sit together in the balcony, and they all have disabilities, I think intellectual disabilities. And I said, that's really interesting. There'd be, where are they from? And he named the residential program they come from, which is a pretty large residential program. And I said, that's really interesting to me that there'd be like 15 people from this residential program who were Jewish. And he said, I don't think any of them are Jewish. I went, oh, no wonder you don't know them, I thought to myself, you see. So the really long answer or explanation of being sure you understand the person's faith tradition and the style of worship that would be a good fit for them. Because there's all, I'm a Presbyterian, there's all kinds of styles of Presbyterian worship and range of members. My church were pretty old, and options for involvement, like how do people get involved, and what's the mission and ministry and classes, and how do new people expect, how do new people become members, and what are their expectations for members, and who are the people who help new members, how are people welcomed, and how do we honor and value, and how do we honor what is typical and valued as much as possible. And that's what I always did in my Presbyterian church consulting, but so often people would move into a community and they would think, well, I need to go someplace where there's a special class for my son or daughter, anyhow. And people would call me and say, how can my son or daughter be involved? And I would ask culturally valued analog questions. How old is your son or daughter? What do other 13-year-olds do in your church? And you see, so same question on this. Have you all had the opportunity to delve into faith community membership with anybody and explore that? And if so, how has that? What have you experienced?
I recently have been going to the Salvation Army Cafe in Melbourne, and I work with 2 young men who are both Christians. One of them so the Salvation Army Cafe is connected to the Salvation Army head office, and a lot of things go on there and a lot of people visit there. One of the people I work with is an artist. He's a painter and a drawer. He's really amazing, and he lives locally. And the other young man lives locally too, and he's been looking for work in a cafe. He uses a wheelchair to get around, and he's had other part-time jobs, but he's been really interested in hospitality lately. So we go there often, and we've sort of developed this relationship with the people that work in the cafe and the people that come in often, and had a lot of conversations around faith and all the amazing sort of social justice projects that go on at the Salvation Army. And through developing that relationship, the young artist has put up a series of artworks on the wall there, which he will be selling. And the other young man is about to start doing some volunteer work there in the cafe, clearing tables and taking out meals and things like that. So that's been like a really fruitful relationship, which has allowed them to be part of that community and share their talents and their skills. And I think that's very in line with what the Salvation Army is about, you know, being inclusive and of all different kinds of people. And but they did have that common interest of, I guess, faith as well from the outset.
Okay, so that's a little different than a church, right? Than a faith community. I don't know a lot about the Salvation Army, but it is a faith-based mission kind of organization, right? Okay.
Yeah, I guess they're more of like a community sort of initiative, but stemming from, you know,
from people's faith, right?
Catholic
so that was
sort of
connection.
Yeah.
These men. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Milton, I was just wondering, Amy, some things that might be worth considering is like how the other artists display their work, and do they display their work in that cafe? Is that culture, you know, does that align with the culturally valued analog there? For example, they might not say they have a disability. If other artists are displaying their work, they might be seen as an artist. The other thing, I think, be interesting to look at the young man who's working and think about, well, how are other people in the cafe trained as well? If we were thinking about some of the things that Milton's just been talking about, because it could be very easy, say, if you're the supporter, to jump into that role and be seen as the only person that offers any support or training to the person. So that little image Milton has of the wedge. Yeah, they were just a couple of things that came to my mind while you were talking.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Before Michael put his artworks up, there were other artists being exhibited on that wall. So there's like a revolving sort of, little mini exhibition that happens there. So I feel like, Michael is sort of, echoing what was already happening there, I guess. And the training would come from the people, the staff. I'm really just the conduit and the connector. You know, I have that conversation with the person and the staff there about that opportunity, possible opportunity, because I've seen they have a lot of different people work there, but then they would be the ones giving the training. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that sounds great, but it might be helpful for other people to know that that's the role that you're taking on, you know, like trying to adapt these learnings to other situations. I think it's a great example.
My son's been raised in our church, and he has almost always participated in the classes with other people, sort of more or less his age group. He was in nursery. He went up to primary. This is Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He went up to primary, which you normally, when you're 12, go from primary into the youth program. We waited till his younger brother, who's 18 months younger, went up to the youth program, and then started inviting Mikhail into the youth program. And he was just allowed to transition at his own pace over about a year and a half or 2 years, until he used to go short time to youth, then he'd go back to primary. He just sort of moved freely between the rooms until he eventually transitioned fully into youth. Up until the start of COVID and the lockdowns here, he would have been early 20s, that would be say 22 or so, and he was still going to the youth program, to their Sunday school and everything. And since then he's still going into them, but he's starting to transition into the young single adults program. But he's been welcome in all the groups. There was one period when he was maybe 7 or 8 when they suggested him having a class on his own with a single teacher, which he might have learned a bit more, but I wasn't happy about him not being with the other kids. But it's been a really positive thing for him. He's got a severe intellectual disability, severe autism, severe language disorder, and Down syndrome. So he certainly doesn't understand everything he's hearing, but he understands a bit. And socially, it's been very good for him as well. And it's been, on the whole, a really positive experience. And the church has been part of our village for raising our children.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sue. It is such an important piece. And, you know, the thing about age, I think, is really important to keep an eye on. You know, it is because so much it is being learned with people within a certain age group. You know, one of the big things has been in my faith tradition, you know, we have confirmation when they're like 12 or 13 years old. And so that's the time to be doing it. And there's all these questions about, well, what does a person understand or not understand, which around faith formation is pretty hard to judge about anybody, I think. But a lot of it came to just different kinds of activities to be involved with, different kinds of functions and activities, and just starting with the best ones that are most likely to work really well, and who were other people to be involved. I mean, what are teamwork like things that you have where people could work together? All of that, I just think, is so important for, you know, everybody involved, you know, in addition to the person, you know, who has a disability. I think, Fiona, you had your hand up on this too.
Yeah, I did. It wasn't about faith-based community, but it was just, I guess, a reflection on a young man who joined a GEM club. And the GEM club, he was in his 30s, and most of the members of the GEM club were older, retired men and women, with a few sort of around his age. But in the GEM club, there are many machines and techniques to learn. And so when a person joins the club and they're interested in anything, one of the other members teaches them, because each member's got a particular passion or experience. And so he's learned very many different techniques and very many different machinery, things that he uses. And we're now 8 years down the track, and he is now the teacher of other people when they come, new members come in. And he's a man with an intellectual disability who has a support person that goes with him, but similar to what someone was saying before about being a connector, and that support person is a standing back person, but is also someone who's learning how to do those things. And this man is teaching them. So it's been a really lovely thing to see the relationships that get built, and the way that this is very ordinary way of teaching and learning that happens in this setting.
Yes, that's I think a very nice example. Thanks, Fiona. Well, let's shift to looking at around the home kinds of things. Like, what would be the CVA for learning to chop vegetables in your home? Just open discussion. Like, how would you, you know, so this is Shanae. And so she got a home of her own when she was a little later in life, but what part of what she was interested in learning about was cooking. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Wash your hands first before you start chopping the veggies.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So you would have that would be part of your method, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and so you would have a method in mind for cutting vegetables. And who would be like let's think of different kinds of contexts for people learning to cut vegetables in their home. So I mean, if you were still living with your mom and dad, that would make sense for your mom or dad. That would be the CVA, right? Or if you were in terms of the person. Jay, you have an idea on this?
Yeah, when I was teaching at kindergarten, because we used to often make soups and different things, so we found these rocker plastic cutters, and that allowed the children to cut up the vegetables themselves, and they did it. They were just amazing how quickly they learnt to chop and cut things up. So I think it's looking at finding ways that they can do it successfully.
That's right. So in this particular instance, Shanae is using some adapted cutting devices. So the method that her roommate would use to cut vegetables is a little bit different than Shanae's, because Shanae has her physical impairment. You may notice her well, both of her hands, like the positioning, like doing fine motor movements and things like that are going to be really hard. So part of the method needed to be developed around a way that would be, equipment that would be safe for Shanae to use. And so it's an example of an adaptation being needed right off the bat for her to cut vegetables. Yeah. We wouldn't want it to be associated with young children, though. We'd want to be sure about that, right, Jay? But something that would be, another way that that it would work for her to safely cut up vegetables and learn how. But there would be a method, there'd be content steps, but you're also thinking about who would be doing the teaching. And okay, let's think about let's see. Well, here's Shanae, and she did join a church, and greeting and passing out items to other members entering the church. How would you go about doing that? Would that be her roommate in her home, or who would be the person? How would you learn about that, like greeting and passing out items to members entering the church? What would you want to know?
You'd need to know what was required, what things are they passing out? Are they passing out hymn books?
Right.
Because,
and probably there's a group of people who gets together and do that, and how do they learn to do it, and who are the people who assist them to do that, and so forth. And that's after getting involved in a faith community that would, be one that would be a fit for Shanae and all of those kinds of things. So we can think of all kinds of things that people may want to learn that would have some time for exploration of, thinking about what it looks like typically for anybody to get involved. Who are the other people who would be a part of that? And how would the person learn it? So learning to cut grass at home would be very different than learning to cut grass for a landscaping business. The CVA would be entirely different. This, what we talked about in terms of method, in terms of whether the CVA would be something based on a personal or a family method or a social norm method, or if it's work and employer preference. Like if somebody wanted to learn how to make coffee, there'd be all kinds of things to learn about that, wouldn't there? In terms of what kind of coffee people wanted to make, drip coffee, or they wanted to use a coffee press, whether they're going to grind their own beans or buy beans already ground. there'd just be a lot of different options to figure out for personal method there, wouldn't there? And in terms of then after you know the method, then if you're going to be doing the teaching, like, you know, what are the content steps that you have in your head while somebody's learning making the coffee? And how are you thinking about how you'll give them, you know, information as they move along? So you need to remember all the same stuff we were talking about: teachable steps for a typical learner, write the steps. Rely on intrinsic motivation, precise demonstration of the method, timing and information. Okay. So I'm just going to end with this slide by Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better.
Closing slide graphic text, with thanks to Milton Tyree. Produced by Belonging Matters. Belonging Matters makes every effort to provide accurate and up-to-date material. However, information is subject to change, and our material is for reference only. This video was produced on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. This video was made possible with the support of an information and capacity building grant through the Department of Social Services. Logos, Belonging Matters, talksthatmatter.net.